Great. Folks, thank you very much for coming to join us this afternoon at this press conference. I am honored to be joining my colleagues in announcing the introduction of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Research Enhancement Act of 2011. This is about a disease that claims 40,000 Americans a year, but which most Americans have never heard of. Another 48,000 Americans are diagnosed each year, but just as worrisome is the number of misdiagnoses and missed diagnoses. We don't know enough about this disease, which is why we're introducing the Pulmonary Fibrosis Research Enhancement Act today in both the Senate and the House. I'm honored to be joined by bipartisan colleagues from both houses, by Senator Crapo, Senator Murray, and Senator Kirk in introducing the bill in the Senate. Congressman Paulson and Congresswoman Baldwin are joining us as partners in the House, and we understand that they're currently voting, and although they wanted to be with us, they were not able to join us today. I am also particularly honored and blessed to be joined by Congressman Mike Castle, who came down from Delaware today because for years he worked tirelessly in the House to advance similar legislation. Pulmonary fibrosis is an issue close to his heart, and I'm so glad he was able to join us here today. Congressman Castle really is the reason that I'm here today and that I am engaged in co-sponsoring this legislation. I've known the congressman since I was in high school and have long admired his decades of leadership, both to our state and in the United States Congress. I didn't know much about pulmonary fibrosis like most Americans and was speaking with him at the White House Christmas party. He and Congressman Baird were talking about what they had done in Congress and what they had hoped to do in the future. And I asked them about some of the things they'd fought hard for. And principal among them was this bill, of which they were co-sponsors in the last Congress. And as I listened to them talk about how this very difficult, very hard disease had affected them and their families personally, I was moved to learn more about it and to join them in standing up as some of the many Americans who have tried to fight to bring PF to the forefront of the American consciousness. One of the things that's always made Delaware special is the way that folks like Congressman Castle and I are able to work together in a bipartisan way to tackle hard issues. Certainly the 200,000 Americans currently affected by pulmonary fibrosis don't care whether the folks who are working on the issue are Democrats or Republicans, members of the House or senators, governors or physicians. They're really less interested in partisanship and role in life than they are in having this dreadful disease tackled. So that's why I'm so proud that both versions of these bills have bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. And I'm proud to stand with my Republican colleagues today in support of this legislation. We've got lots of folks who want to say a few words, so I'll be brief. But let me quickly say that this bill does three main things. It creates a pulmonary fibrosis registry and advisory board, because getting a handle on this disease requires understanding exactly how prevalent it is. We need better information, and this bill will help us get that. It tasks the CDC with developing an action plan for education and awareness for how we get on a path towards a future cure of this disease, and it encourages the NIH to expand research into pulmonary fibrosis so that one day we will have a cure. With that, we have many more capable folks than I to talk about the specifics, and I am grateful that Senator Mark Kirk, my colleague from Illinois, is here to join us. Senator Kirk.
Thank you. I want to thank Senator Coons. He's part of our sometimes Thursday bipartisan lunch bunch that we're trying to get going here, and especially my dear friend Congressman Castle that we worked together with for 10 years on this and other issues. I know pulmonary fibrosis well. When my father was diagnosed 5 years ago, it was called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. I felt like it was idiotic pulmonary fibrosis because we didn't have a cure. And the misdiagnosis that Senator Coons talked about happened in our case. My dad even had a new heart valve put in because the disease was so poorly understood. Dad started walking around saying that he had what he called the huffy puffies, where he ran out of air. And finally, the diagnosis was made. And so we got two big bad pieces of news. First, I think the average patient, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, lasts about 3 years after diagnosis. And secondly, that there is no cure. Basically a vast regimen of steroids to hold off and try to preserve what lung function is there, slowly deteriorating. And then secondly, that long slide into night on morphine, which I witnessed in his living room. We lost him, as well as you heard, 40,000 other Americans, 200,000 of our fellow citizens, to a disease that is unlike many others. We've seen so much progress with the doubling of the National Institutes of Health that the average cancer patient now will survive. That's not true for this disease, and that's why I'm so glad that this is bipartisan and bicameral. Because right now, the diagnosis delivered to my father or other Americans is pretty bad news and a long slide to the end. And I think we can do something about it. And this registry will help the diagnosis problem, and the research, of course, will help the big issue. So it's strange to say this, but in the 1960s, cancer was an automatic death sentence. Now very much it's not, I think, because of a lot of federal research and other research. My hope is we can have that for this disease as well, which marked my family and especially my father so heavily. So.
Thank you, Senator Kirk, both for your leadership on this and for sharing both personally how difficult this disease can be and a vision of a day in which it is no longer such a terrible experience for American families. I'd now like to introduce to you a man who needs no introduction, Congressman Mike Castle, who served our state so ably as a two-term governor and a many-term congressman and a great leader for Delaware and for our whole country. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Mike Castle.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Well, I'm also very pleased to be here. I always sort of thought I'd be doing press conferences in the Senate, but this is my opportunity, I guess. It's a pleasure to share this podium with you for just a couple of minutes talking about something that you now know has affected so many families and individuals. And in my situation, I had an older sister and an older brother who went through this, and I saw the torture of it, the difficulty of it, at that time completely unknown to any of us. I just had no idea what they were dealing with, and with some education, I learned something about it. A lot of the people behind us who've been involved with this far before I was were very helpful in educating me. We were able to put together the legislation, which is basically embodied in the legislation being introduced in the House and the Senate, again, in this particular year, in order to shine a brighter light on this disease and how we might be able to either cure it or prevent it as far as the future is concerned. And I believe that the legislation is sound, and hopefully it will pass. The number of 40,000 people who die from this on an annualized basis is interesting because it happens to be comparable roughly to the same number of people who die from breast cancer each year. Breast cancer is probably a disease that is more recognized and understood than almost any other disease in America and even around the world today. There's been tremendous activity on that, and in no way should we ever take away from the research and the focus on that particular disease. But to have another disease in which there is no cure, in which people suffer tremendously, in which is getting almost no real research dollars to speak of, and in which there's such great lack of public understanding, needs to be elevated to the point that people realize that when you're diagnosed with this, your chances of living are unfortunately probably 5 years or less. And there are, as I said, a number of people here who have seen this in their families, perhaps have suffered with it themselves, and that is extraordinarily complex. And my judgment is we need to do everything we can. I'm involved with Research America. Former Congressman John Porter is the head of that board, and I agreed to serve on it. And we watch carefully what is happening in research in the United States. And I have learned that there's a lot of crossover. When you find a solution to a problem of cancer, such as Mark Kirk identified, you may find a solution to a lung problem or to a heart problem or to whatever it may be. Research tends to be able to cross over from one disease to another. So I think elevating the recognition of the fact that pulmonary fibrosis is a tremendous difficulty in the disease field could be very helpful in terms of incorporating research from all over that can make a difference in the lives of individuals. I would like to thank my friend Mark Kirk, who's been involved with this. You heard his own obvious concerns with his father's circumstance. I'd like to thank Brian Baird, who's not with us. Washington State's a long ways to come for a press conference. But it was a great leader in this particular circumstance. I particularly like to thank Senator Chris Coons, my friend from Wilmington, Delaware, who listened and is making a difference as far as this is concerned. He deserves, as far as I am concerned, a lot of credit. And I particularly thank all the family members and the others who day by day have been dealing with this problem in some way or another. We're here today and hopefully can keep encouraging everybody in Congress and perhaps across this country to make a difference, to make sure that we are dealing with the problems of pulmonary fibrosis. And it is my hopes that the next time we have a press conference is to start to announce advances in the cures and perhaps prevention of pulmonary fibrosis.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your long leadership on this and on so many other issues. I'd like to ask Teresa Barnes, the Vice President of Patient Outreach and Program Support for the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis, to join us for a moment at the podium and add some more details to what the outreach and education efforts might add.
Thank you, Senator. I've dreamed about this for a long time, that one day we would be in a room like this and you'd be here and we'd be able to tell you about what we're doing and how great it is and how we're soon going to be able to do something about this awful disease. And, I look at the faces here and I know all of these people and how this disease has affected them. And this little speech I wrote kind of goes out the window because it's an awful experience. And I was going to tell you about my friend Doris, who was transplanted for this disease. She survived breast cancer, but she developed this. And they said, well, you might live a few years. She was 40 years old. She actually was transplanted, and I was hoping she might make it here today, but she couldn't. Another friend he received a transplant on Sunday, and the only chance for survival is with a lung transplant. And, we have a surgeon here who knows, and many of you may know, when you start moving body parts out, that's a big deal. We need better answers. And only about 1% of our patients, transplant's an option for them. So that's not really a treatment option. Today, I'd like to thank Senator Coons, Senator Crapo, Senator Kirk, Senator Murray, Congressman Paulson, and Congresswoman Baldwin for stepping up and making today happen. And Congressman Castle, I don't even know where to start. Thank you for everything, and to Congressman Baird as well. And back years ago, if you all hopefully remember Congressman Norwood, and he had pulmonary fibrosis, as many of you know, and he passed away as a result of complications that are typical. Patients often develop cancers after they survive this, and sometimes they don't make it. I just want to thank the staffs, because we all know that these guys do a lot of work, but you guys do a lot of lifting. And if it wasn't for you, today wouldn't have happened either. Thank you so much for not only what you did today, but what you're going to do over the coming weeks and months to make this happen. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to let you know that, I've lost 5 people in my family to this, 100% of the generation that precedes me. So my twin sister and I, my brother and my cousins, are all in the bullseye. And most people get the disease 15 years younger than their parents did. And that's where I am right now. So I'm petrified because there are no treatments today. And I have a 10-month-old daughter. And I look at her and I just think, I don't want her to ever know about this. And so I do this every day to make sure she doesn't. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa, for reminding us about the ongoing, very real human costs and very real challenges ahead and for your work. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Daniel Rose, the president of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, to join us for a few words about the prospects going forward and the impact this bill may have. Doctor?
It's always tough to follow Teresa. I want to sincerely thank Senator Coons and Senator Kirk and the other congressmen that have reintroduced the Research Enhancement Act into the 112th Congress. And I also want to particularly thank Representative Castle, who along with Representative Brian Baird have previously worked so hard for passage of this legislation. I had been a practicing cardiac surgeon for many years, and pulmonary fibrosis was not on my radar until my aunt died from the disease in 1994. A few years later, my father was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, and the following year, his brother found out he had the disease. My father remained courageous and optimistic throughout his battle with pulmonary fibrosis, but he passed away in 2002 at the age of 85. My father came to this country in 1922 as a 5-year-old immigrant from Poland. He grew up in a small apartment in the Bronx. After the Second World War, he moved to Colorado and became a very successful businessman. He was a very generous and compassionate individual who was deeply loved by his family and friends. After he became ill, he wanted to try to do something so others wouldn't have to suffer the way he did, and he decided to establish the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. At that time, there was no organization advocating for the pulmonary fibrosis community. None of us has the luxury of choosing our parents. I feel fortunate and blessed to have Albert Rose as my father. Last spring, I had the opportunity to talk to Representative Baird, and he had very similar feelings about his father. I'm also sure that Senator Kirk has comparable sentiments about his father, and I know Representative Castle has been deeply affected by the loss of his siblings. I am deeply grateful and privileged to be able to speak today on behalf of the pulmonary fibrosis community and also my father. As you've heard, pulmonary fibrosis is an extremely lethal disease that hasn't gained a lot of attention. It is at least 6 times more common than cystic fibrosis, but still relatively unheard of. The prognosis for this disease is worse than 90% of all malignancies, with an average life expectancy of 2 to 3 years from the time of diagnosis. As you've heard, annually as many people die from pulmonary fibrosis as breast cancer, and the only effective therapy is lung transplantation, which is only available to a very small number of patients. A surveillance registry is critically needed to provide information that is essential to helping develop effective therapies. There is much essential epidemiologic information about the disease that we don't know, and this knowledge can only be gained through a registry. Through these collaborative efforts, I am optimistic that we can develop successful and effective treatments. The Foundation is profoundly committed to actively and aggressively supporting passage of this legislation. Once again, I want to thank all the members of Congress that have worked hard to introduce this legislation, and to Representative Castle for all the hard work he's done over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Senator Kirk. Thank you, Congressman Castle, and to everyone who's joined us today. We were now going to take questions. If any members of the media had questions, I will defer to folks who actually know the answers, but I get to be the person who plays traffic cop on any of the questions. So does anyone have questions they'd like to ask us before we wrap up today? Nicole. I believe it was introduced in the 111th and the 110th. And this bill's substantially similar. They're very, very similar. There being no further questions, I just want to say the introduction of this bill is just the beginning of the fight for passage. I know we'll all be working hard to get co-sponsors. We've spoken to a number of other members of both the House and Senate. Members of the Senate to whom I've spoken who are familiar with you, Congressman, were additionally moved both by his reputation and by the importance of the underlying issue and the ways in which it's affected so many families. So I'm quite optimistic that this bill will continue to pick up co-sponsors, and I am optimistic it will be passed by this Congress. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your service.